Welcome, everyone, to Demanding Climate Action Leadership, What's at Stake in Toronto's Election. My name is Ma Ma. I'm the Executive Director at the Toronto Environmental Alliance, or T, as most of you know us. I'll be your host for this evening. To open our event this evening, I would now like to introduce Merv King. Merv King is a steelworker, coordinator of the Injured Workers Program, and a member of the Temiskaming First Nation. Merv is a climate champion, a fighter for workers' rights, and combines these with his commitment to community.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Merv King. I'm an Algonquin, and I'm a proud steelworker, as you just said. I encourage all of you to reflect on the land that you're on and who the traditional keepers of these lands are, and what the treaty relationship is between all of the people living upon the many number of treaties across this country, treaties that were signed between the British Crown and also later on the Canadian government. One of the Iroquois teachers from the Mohawks' prayers influenced what we need to do now. And it goes, our grandmother, the moon, watches over all female life on earth and has concern for the coming generations of people. Has given instruction that when people come together to plan, they will plan for several generations to come so that our children and grandchildren will not be hurt by the decisions that we make today. And those are the decisions we make with respect to the lands, the waters, and the many people living on these lands. One of the things that we need to look at now is we're coming up on an election on October the 24th, a provincial election. So with an election, we need to get out and vote and support the people who are environmentally, labor, and Indigenous friendly people, so that the future, as we said, to the future for the next 7 generations, we will have a future. If we don't do something about the climate now, then we're not going to have that future for anyone. There won't be 7 generations. 2030 is coming up pretty quickly, and that's part of the commitment that countries are making to reduce the carbon emissions and reduce the dependency on fossil fuels. There's just today there was an explosion at a North Sea gas well or oil well, and it's putting oil into the ocean. So we have to look at all of these things as people. We need to, come together. It was pretty exciting to see the Fridays for Future, the youth of the city and this country coming together in a big demo, along with the labor people and a big contingent of labor folks, and also the environmental people who are always there. Every time there's something out for the environment, the people are there. We can't just keep saying that things need to be done. There has to be action taken. It's getting too late. You can't just keep saying something needs to be done. We have to force politicians and people in power, people who can make these kinds of decisions. We have to get them to take action. When we see the flooding and all over the world, there's the big, huge floods and hurricanes are coming one right after the other. Look what all the damage that we have in maritime provinces, Nova Scotia, people's houses and people washed out into the ocean, and 3 people that's happened to. There's only one person was ended up being saved. So you can't just look at and say, well, these things are happening in other places around the world. These things are happening here. We're looking at the problems. The ice glaciers are melting too fast. These things are receding so fast that people, there isn't going to be a future for people. And, we've got to stop it now. And the way to do that, like I said, is to get out on the election days, get out there and vote and make sure that the people you're voting for And if you can get out and help in any way to get somebody elected, then you should be out there doing whatever you can to make sure that, like you say, worker friendly, environmental friendly, and Indigenous friendly people get elected to these positions. You know, the hard work of Andrea and everyone like this. Mike Layton has retired from politics, so he won't be one that we could vote for. But you know, I don't live in Toronto myself, but I follow what happens in Toronto because I work there every day. And getting back to you know, the basis of all this, I believe, is education. You have to educate the people on climate change and get people to know that it's a serious issue, not something that we can just ignore. You know, so anyways, I guess I should hand it over back to the moderator, and we can get going. As you can see, I have some Indigenous art behind me. If you like to look at that, it also getting back to the basics. You know, years ago, one of my brothers said, when I was fishing, we were fishing and we looked in this river, and there was a big piece of steel and a bunch of garbage laying around on the ground where people had been fishing and, you know, throwing beer bottles and all kinds of stuff around, you know, in a nice, beautiful, pristine area. And then you see garbage in the middle of it. And then you say, you know what? My brother said, this was years and years ago. He said, you know what they need to do with this country? And I said, what's that? He said, they need to give it back to the Indians and apologize for what they've done to it. So that's what's happening to Mother Earth. They're just destroying it. As Creator says, you know, we were put on this planet. We're all part of everything, is all interconnected. The wind, the trees, the animals, the birds, the bees, the insects, the fish, all the animals, we're all part of that nature. We're Mother Earth's environment. Thanks. Thank you for listening to my words. Part of this thing is about for Indigenous people, there's 7 grandfathers and teachings, and one of the first teaching is of wisdom, that wisdom, knowledge is wisdom, and knowledge should be shared amongst all the people. So we need to share the knowledge about how to save this planet. So thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Merv, for your opening words and for helping us prepare our minds and our hearts for the discussion this evening, and helping us connect those very important threads to prepare for what we need to do. So thank you again. Really great to see everyone joining the event this evening. We've got a great lineup on deck for you. We're going to kick things off with a live performance. We'll then take a virtual tour of a green building. We'll have a keynote from Mike Layton, and this will be followed by what I'm sure will be a very lively panel discussion and some audience participation. So please stay tuned for that. So it's now my pleasure to start things off by introducing Muhammad Ali. Muhammad, the socialist vocalist, is a member of the American Federation of Musicians, Local 419. Muhammad is an MC, poet, author, and activist who has performed at hundreds of social justice, labor, human rights, and community-based events over the past decade. Over to you, Muhammad.
Thank you. And it's a Local 149, I believe, of the Toronto American Federation of Musicians. I just want to start off by recognizing that I'm presently on the lands of the Nehiawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Michif Métis Nation. And I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm a settler on this land here in Treaty 4, and as many of us in this meeting are settlers on this land, I'd like to reaffirm, our collective responsibilities to honor, sustain, and protect the lands that we are on today. And I would like to do that today in this meeting by sharing a poem I wrote specifically for this presentation. It is called Grassroots. Muhammad Ali, the socialist vocalist. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. And here is Grassroots. We're here to demand action on climate because Mother Earth has started not a quiet riot. Who are we going to look to? These corporate pirates whose performative actions mute us into silence? Nah, I reject their greenwash agenda for the truth. I reject the corner office skyscraper for the grassroots. For the grass who? For the grassroots. For the grass who? For the grassroots. You and you and you and you. The grassroots rooted in common struggle could be loud and brash or calm and subtle, could be shutting down traffic, direct action, or parliamentary process, bill and policy passing. My grassroots is rooted in solidarity. My grassroots is in these songs you see. My grassroots is rooted from sea to overseas. My grassroots is transparent for all to see. My grassroots ain't transnational pipelines. My grassroots ain't liberal jargon, worthless guidelines. My grassroots ain't rooted in unrealistic G20 guidelines. My grassroots is rooted in sending Mother Earth a lifeline. And that's why my grassroots is rooted in a rejection of their greenwash agenda for the truth. I reject the corner office skyscraper for the grassroots. For the grass who? For the grassroots. For the grass who? For the grassroots. For you and you and you and you. For the grassroots. Peace, love, solidarity. Thank you, y'all.
Yes, please, or Mohammed, thank you so much for that great, powerful opener. And it's great to remind ourselves about the power of the spoken word and the importance of voices in art, in music, and other forms in our movement, and how those contribute to organizing. So thank you for that. I would now like to welcome Cassandra Crease, who will be introducing our next segment. Cassandra is a hazmat apprentice with the International Union of Allied Trades and Painters. And Cassandra is also a Toronto Community Benefits Network Community Benefits Ambassador. Over to you, Cassandra.
All right, thank you, Ame. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for making time this evening to join us. It's great to be here with you. So again, just to introduce myself, my name is Cassandra Crease, and I am one of the TCBN, or Toronto Community Benefits Network's Community Benefit Ambassadors. So in this role, I help to promote marginalized people to get into a construction trade of their choice, as well as I promote the necessity of community benefit agreements being part of the public infrastructure projects here in Ontario. That's like the LRTs that you see on Finch or Eglinton, or the buildings of hospitals, any type of public infrastructure project. So I myself am navigating the field of construction. I am a hazardous materials worker, or for short, hazmat. You may know those people who wear the white suits and the respirator masks. That's the field I'm in. So I'm an apprentice right now, and I'm hoping to be a journey person one day. So on the job sites, I see a lot of old building materials, some containing asbestos, some containing lead or mold. So asbestos and lead at one time were heavily incorporated into building materials. But we learned the hard way that these have major health and environmental impacts. So the standards of how buildings are built have changed. We don't use asbestos in building materials anymore. And we're realizing that there must be even more changes so that we reduce our carbon footprint. So you may have heard the terms green building or green technology. So it's the skilled trade workers, so that includes you and I. We are the people that will be making green buildings a reality. So our work that we do in the skilled trades is what will create a positive change to our environment and to help us all collectively reduce our carbon footprint. So Toronto Community Benefits Network has a great video to show you what a green building actually is. So in this video, you will see a building that is the first of its kind in Canada. This is the Ron Joyce Center for Partnership and Innovation at Mohawk College. So you will see that green technology is already here and how the construction industry is a major player in the environment and climate change. So I'll pass it back to the host, MA. Thank you.
So a tour like this to see the Ron Joyce Center for Partnership and Innovation at Mohawk College is amazing because one, it's showcasing that this was the first building in Canada. And two, I think if this gets broadcast widely, more people will come and maybe take a tour and understand that the technology is so simple.
Canada Green Building Council is very proud to see different organizations, institutions stepping up to the plate and saying, we need to build more conscious buildings. And at CAGBC, that's what it's all about. How do we look at the built environment and help all of these incredible buildings transform through retrofits or new buildings to be able to reach the same standard as the incredible Joyce Center and what's happened here?
This building, what we showed in this building, when it was finished and we had all the data and the numbers, this building did not cost any more to build than any other typical, conventional, institutional building in Canada. There's lots of data, lots of studies. We showed all that.
When we incorporate such green building constructions and efficient buildings, it will promise us an easy way to tackle the climate change.
Carbon normally, and if it didn't have that nice, tight, leak-proof envelope, you would need 2 or 3 major air handling systems just to pump enough air in here.
Construction is a big sector for us right now. We're seeing a lot more jobs come up, especially during COVID. Things aren't slowing down, so it's really helpful to get our students out there and to give them the opportunity to learn. Green building means that we're not just setting them up for construction jobs, but we're setting them up for sustainable construction jobs in a sector that is growing and is going to become even more important.
So we're all here. We're going to go down the hallway and we're going to go into what's called the water room. When you saw the grass area outside, where the geothermal wells were drilled in, it's just outside this wall. We're about 20 feet below ground here. You know, it's not a normal basement, we're a little bit lower. But that's where all the geothermal wells are. And those are the pipes that come from those, and they come through this wall and they go into this room here.
The thing that we just saw is now innovative and one of a kind. In the very near future, it's going to have to become the norm if we have any hope at all of getting to net zero by 2050.
Touring facilities like this, meeting the kind of network connections that are available here on this tour, it's all a really awesome partnership. And it's just essentially like a wonderful opportunity to teach them about either a educational pathway through Mohawk College and the skilled trades at Stony Creek, or to build them into employment opportunities that exist in the community.
I can see the future, you know, like I think the CBN gave me opportunity to see a new way to construct my career here.
Skilled trade workers are the people who make zero carbon buildings happen. And if we want a lot of zero carbon buildings, then we need a lot of skilled trade workers to be able to build them.
Being able to do what I love, which is building, but doing it responsibly, doing it in a way that you can sort of go home at night and feel good about yourself, and you know you're making steps forward as well, instead of sort of making your bank.
I would like to thank Toronto Community Benefits and Mohawk College for participating in promoting green technology and green buildings, because as Mohawk's theme is future ready, we're future ready.
Thank you so much, Cassandra, for introducing the video. We talk a lot about climate solutions, and sometimes that can seem really abstract, and we talk about green jobs, but you really brought it home for us in your opening words. But also, it was great to see, the kind of work that is possible highlighted by the video. And it also reminds us of all the work that is yet to be done in terms of creating more pathways to green jobs, but also the work that needs to be done in our buildings in Toronto. So thank you very much, Cassandra, and also a big shout out to the Toronto Community Benefits Network, TCBN, for providing that great video. And so now I would like to take everyone back in time, just a little bit, to September 2019. So during this time, many of you will remember that youth across the world were organizing the Global Days of Climate Action. And here, the mobilization was organized by Climate Justice Toronto and Fridays for Future Toronto, supported by some allies too. And there was just this incredible groundswell. And you might recall, some of you were probably there with us at Queen's Park when thousands and thousands of people turned out for the rally in March. And it was a really beautiful thing to behold. But also what was really important about the moment that was created was that not only were youth coming out in huge numbers and leading the way, but they were also exerting a kind of important political pressure that other organizations were able to seize on, including my organization, T, and the Toronto Climate Action Network, working together with allies like the Labour Council. And we were able to use this moment to come together and demand with thousands of residents that the city declare a climate emergency. And we did this with an outside campaign, but we were also working with climate champions at Toronto City Council. And, as Merv opened with, this brings us to the point of this evening, that we are at a really important juncture with the upcoming municipal election to see climate championed in our new council in the new term. And so what we won as a result of getting the city to declare a climate emergency, which was declared unanimously, as you may remember, was also getting Toronto to make substantial commitments. So setting a new net zero emissions target and interim targets, committed to creating a low carbon job strategy that supports a decent work agenda and career pathways for equity deserving groups, and developing a strategy to secure dedicated and sustained climate funding to adequately finance climate actions. So as you'll hear tonight, and as many of you may know, not all these commitments have been fulfilled, but the climate emergency declaration created a major foundation for advancing climate action in Toronto. So at this point, I would like to introduce someone that has been a longtime climate champion on City Council. Mike Layton is the outgoing City Councillor for Ward 11, University Rosedale. As a councillor, Mike worked tirelessly to protect and improve city services that people depend on and to preserve the diverse character of Toronto's neighborhoods. Along with his work on housing, arts, and other aspects of building a more livable and equitable city, Mike has been a relentless advocate, calling on City Council to make Toronto a world leader in the fight to address the climate crisis, which includes actioning and resourcing Toronto's ambitious Transform TO climate strategy. Welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you very much, MA, and thank you all for taking an evening off of your families and the other things that you're doing to share with us tonight. It's with a lot of mixed emotions. I got to tell you that this will be my last term of City Council, and unlike the comment that was just in the chat, I didn't register by the deadline, so it is too late for me to continue my work as a City Councillor. But I'm going to explain to you tonight that I don't think that that's the only way that I can exert my power, and that you can exert yours and demonstrate yours. And I hope that that what I have to say tonight will leave you with some inspiration to go and do that. I want to talk about three things tonight. One is, why do we need to act now on climate change on the municipal level? Two, what do we need to do and what has been done to this point that we can build upon? And finally, how can we mobilize and ensure that it's done? And I'm going to start with why. And I think many of you you're here because you know why. And I'm not going to get to any detail, but Merv said something that really hits me hard. And it's a lot of why more recently I have found that I am not spending enough time working on climate issues, and it's what Merv said about the generations to follow. Because I too, like, I've spent 11 years on the Indigenous Affairs Committee at City Hall, 8 years chairing it. I too subscribe to this notion we should be looking 7 years back, 7 generations back and 7 generations into the future. And during my term of council, which is the other reason why I don't think I can return at this point in time, is during this term of council, I've had 2 kids. And I've got a 4-year-old Chloe and a 6-year-old Phoebe. And, like, to be honest, to be like brutally honest with all of you, I'm having difficulty imagining how they're going to live when they're older, and if they'll even have children. And for me, that has a big emotional response. Will I ever get to be a grandfather? Now, I never thought about this before. Now I'm still a pretty young guy, but it struck me incredibly hard when I started to realize that their lives will be enormously different than my upbringing was and my life was, as was mine from my parents, my grandparents, and all that. But the difference here is they might not have a healthy planet to live on. They might not have clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, a suitable food to eat, because our food systems could break down so enormously on a global scale that they might not be able to enjoy some of those foods. That has a different impact on me than it did prior to me having kids. And so I really do miigwech to Merv for bringing it up, because that's one of the reasons why I feel I need to dedicate all of myself, my energy, my emotional energy, my physical energy, the time I have left here to try to address that point. I have that obligation, as I think many of you share in that. And this changing planet is going to impact our economy so much that the way we work and the way we sustain ourselves will change with it. And if we don't get out ahead of that curve, we'll either be swallowed by climate change or just absorbed by other economic forces globally that have gotten out ahead of us and started to make that change to a low carbon, no carbon economy. I don't think we have an option here. Like, for my girls' sake, for all of for every generation to follow of Canadian, of Torontonian, we need to make sure that we're starting to position ourselves not only as the generation that saved the world, but also as the generation that ensured that it was a more equitable space and economy. But we can do that. And the tools are there, and much of it has been set out for us. So let me just talk to you really quickly about sort of where we've been. 2012, it was actually a motion that I put forward, 2015 was a motion that I put forward to establish a subcommittee on climate mitigation and adaptation, appoint Councillor Gord Perks as the chair, and that led to a community dialogue. All it was asking for, it wasn't saying, here's what you need to do. It was saying, engage the community, bring them with us, bring people in, bring workers, bring industry, bring the public, bring Indigenous groups, bring youth, bring seniors, bring people to the table and come up with a path forward. That path forward in 2017 was brought to City Council as Transform TO. It was adopted unanimously. 2017, it was adopted unanimously. The target was 80% by 2050. Was great at the time. Was North America standard at the time. Now we can, because not all jurisdictions fulfilled their obligations, including our own as a country, we continued down a path that required an even more significant response, which is why in 2019, as Emma said, we responded to this global outcry with a climate emergency motion at Toronto City Council. It wasn't novel at the time. Other municipalities were doing it. There's a little fun story about it that I technically put my motion in first and the mayor's came second. So he said, Mike, can I have your spot in line as the motions go? And I said, well, if you let me write your motion I'll let you have it. And then we went into a whole bunch of dialogue with a bunch of environmental groups and the Labor Council, and we came up with the language that then the mayor adopted, which was a fun game in politics that we play at City Council at times. So we managed to position that forward, and that called for more aggressive targets. Those more aggressive targets came back in 2021 as our new net zero by 2040. Which still is sort of the North American standard for strong policy. But it also includes, as MA said, engagement with those that are going to help bring us there, workers, Indigenous organizations, other individuals that aren't represented typically in the decision-making and the power hierarchy that exists amongst the municipal and all the other levels of government. So what came back wasn't necessarily a plan. It was a plan for a plan, but it had good targets, really good, solid targets. And it was something that that was adopted by City Council that called for, their takeaways were this. One, we need to get away from natural gas and gasoline in cars, and not at sort of a gradual pace. Well, let's let people do it voluntarily. By 2040, there needs to be no natural gas used in homes and no gasoline powered cars. That is just how we're going to actually hit that goal. Another takeaway was early actions save money in the long term. Investments now, pay off later. The third was electrification is key. Electrify everything as fast as you can. And then finally, with that electrification, you need to make the electricity grid carbon free. There's one great thing about all of this, and I'll get to it later, but most of that involves local economic activity and local jobs, because most of that involves actually changing over technology to newer technology. And the faster we get there and the more certainty we give manufacturers, the more jobs will come to our jurisdiction, because frankly, we're going to need 1 million heat pumps, something like at least 24,000 a year for the next 20 years. And that, if we can give that certainty to large scale manufacturing, or we do it ourselves as governments, which we've done in the past, World War II is a good example, we could get there. But it also acknowledged this transformed TO that progress, while we hit our 2020 target, as established previously with a 30% reduction to 1990 emissions, the reductions had plateaued. We had stopped our reduction, maybe that, I don't know, that, whatever. Our reductions had stopped. And it's not that the city's reductions, or the city as a corporation, the government activity had stopped reducing, but we only account for a little bit. It's something like 4% of the overall emissions in the city of Toronto are a result of the city's operations. So the operations that the city pays for. And so what we need is leadership from both governments, but also the cooperation with the private sector and community. We need to bring everyone along in this exercise to decarbonize our lifestyles, our economy. Now, there are 5 critical steps. Now, the first one they said, and I'm going to touch on this again as well, maybe in a question that's been given, is accountability and carbon budgets. It's very difficult to actually track, how much you're actually reducing in the amount of carbon that's being expelled, that's the amount of emissions, but 2, how we're making decisions as a city for how we spend our money to actually achieve that. Second is we need to accelerate the reduction, and rapidly deploy technology to drastically reduce the amount of natural gas we use in buildings. Cities are the primary source of emissions, are buildings and transportation. That is a major focus of what the city's plan needs to be in the next decade, 2 decades. We need performance targets for existing buildings, because as we've seen in other jurisdictions, if it's not measured, it's not acted upon. But other jurisdictions have been doing this for years. Our provincial government was on the cusp of doing it and then backed away. The city has a commitment to it, but it's not clear how far we could implement that because of the powers of the city that are given to us from the province. But we need to start setting performance targets for existing buildings. Next is increasing low carbon transportation options. This means not only converting to EVs, but getting more people on public transit, getting more people cycling and get safer cycling infrastructure, and frankly, building denser neighborhoods so that more people can walk to work or feel comfortable walking on the streets and can access the services they need without using a car, a gasoline powered car. And then finally, increasing renewables for a more resilient and carbon-free grid. That means rooftop solar, that means Great Lakes wind, that means geothermal where that's feasible, and certainly air source heat pumps. But we need to make sure that the electricity used for to heat homes and to power vehicles is made through a carbon-free source. There are interim targets, and I'm not going to get to them in detail because I want to talk about the how just for a moment if I could. But there are interim targets, which gives us a good place to start being accountable for the decisions that are made. But those income targets, they're not going to be hit this next term of council, but they will be hit the term after that. So the actions of this term of council will certainly dictate whether or not we are able to meet our 2030 targets. It's the end of the next, after the next two terms that we will know, did we get 65% reduction in GHGs from existing buildings? Did we have 100% of new buildings near zero? Now I moved the motion to actually institute that in a couple of years. So I'm confident it'll get there, but who knows? This next council could walk away. But did we get a 50% of our energy was from renewable or low carbon sources? Are we hitting our number of trips under 5 kilometers, our 75% of trips under 5 kilometers being walked, biked, or by public transit? These are things that this council will certainly be judged on in 2030, whether or not we made it. So how do we do it? You know what? I'd love to say the city could do anything we want. We can't. We've tried, and sometimes we've been pushed back by either individuals through the courts. The plastic bag lobby was a good example. When we put a ban on plastic bags, they turned around and took us to court and they won. But that doesn't mean we have to stop. There's a lot of great examples of when cities demanded a change in the power structure from the provincial government, and they gave it to them. I'll give like we've had a couple small examples in the last couple of years of just me asking, like a motion from me at council saying, well, let's ask the province to do this. The home energy loan program is entirely possible because of a change that we got done as a community of environmentalists. This is the home energy loan program allowing for loans to come from the city and put onto houses for energy retrofits. Contraflow bike lanes are only possible because I asked the minister of the day, Minister Murray, to change a very insignificant regulation that didn't allow for contraflow bike lanes. Since they've changed that, we've now have enormous success on our contraflow bike lanes because they're on quiet residential streets for the most part. Shaw Street went from 700 bikes a day in both directions to 4,500 bikes a day in both directions without impacting much parking on the street. That's an enormous contribution to creating low carbon transportation options for people. So we do have the power as a municipality to push the city. So don't let candidates say, oh, we don't have the power, and then let them off the hook. They can still ask for it. Things like congestion charges will take provincial approval and encouragement. Things like tolls, the same. Not that I'm a huge fan of tolls because of its because of how much it costs and how much we line the pockets of multinational corporations just to institute the tolls. Not a big fan, but I have voted for them before, so don't hold that against me either. I just think that we can't let candidates off the hook, saying that if we can bring enough support to Queen's Park, they may very well give municipalities the power to do some really good things. We just need to mobilize that support and to build support through our networks, Labor Council, environmental organizations. We pull together those resources and pool our voices, and we become louder and more significant. And that the second is, like, I got so sick and tired, and like maybe one of the reasons why I'm not going to run again, of hearing from just about everyone, this isn't the right time. You know, we don't have the resources right now. Oh, this is going to be a terrible budget. You're going to hear that over and over again every single year, because we've heard it every single year for the past 40 years. This isn't the right time. It's there. If we're going to respond with the sense of urgency that climate change requires, we're going to push back on that notion that it's just not a good time. It wasn't a great time for COVID. Governments know that. Every individual knows that. Every time your kid gets a runny nose and you got to keep them home, it's not a good time. But it's a necessary thing to benefit everyone. And so we're going to mobilize our resources. We're going to be louder than we ever have before. We're going to demand action from this municipal government to ensure that the goals they set, the good goals they set, are met, and that we resource it appropriately. We know it's an inconvenient time. We know the municipality may not have all the power necessary, but we come to them with our voices to tell other governments that we need action. I think I got an all good from MA on my mic check, but I'm not sure where I am on time. I'll just leave with this. We may not have the power to hire expensive lobbyists, to go out and put billboards up with our message, or to flyer every household with what we're asking people to do. But all we can do, and we need to do all of it, is mobilize our networks, have conversations with our friends, family, and peers, and anyone you can think of, to try to get them to also raise their voices. Because together, that chorus of voices is what moves politicians at every level of government. And trust me, I know people on every level of government, either as family members or as close friends, or as directly involved. That chorus of voices singing a set of values that I also believe in, and that I want to ensure that my kids know I believed in and made decisions to address. That is what moves people into action. So I'll leave it there. I know there may be questions. I hope I didn't go too long, but we've got an opportunity here in the next 2 terms of council to achieve some of the things that we set in the last term of council. And I look forward to working all of you to put pressure on council to do.
Thank you so much, Mike. You've given us a whole lot to digest, and you've also done a wonderful job of setting the stage for our panel discussion. And I will note for the record that you did confirm that you did not register to run again. So if hopes weren't dashed before, they should be now. You have set the record straight. So now we're going to move to the panel component of our evening. Just to let folks now know how it's going to go, we're going to have the panel for about 25 to 30 minutes. We're going to have 2 rounds of questions for the panelists. And we'll ask the panelists to respond to the questions in about 2 or 3 minutes each round, to keep it short so that we have some room for audience questions, which is obviously a key component that we want to have tonight. But before we move to the audience questions, we will also have a little poll/quiz for our participants this evening. So it's my pleasure to introduce the rest of the panel. So to start with, Andrea Babington was elected president of the Toronto and York Region Labour Council in June 2021. She began this role as the Labour Council was celebrating its 150th anniversary. Andrea was a key organizer in the hospitality industry and is now leader of Canada's largest Labour Council. She brings her organizing smarts to the climate action struggle, and we are grateful for that. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Chloe C., who is a youth organizer and climate activist. She is the co-chair of the Toronto Climate Action Network, or TCAN, and a bank hub coordinator for Banking on a Better Future, an organization that is demanding an end to all financial support for fossil fuel industries. Welcome, Chloe.
Thanks, MA. Good to see everyone.
So I'm very excited to be hosting this panel, which has so many interesting experiences to offer us tonight. I'm going to start off with one question that I will ask all the panelists, and I'm going to begin with Chloe. So the question is, Mike has highlighted that while it's important for other levels of government to come to the table, our municipal government has significant power to advance climate action in Toronto. What key opportunities are you excited to see our City Council take up and champion this coming term? And what barriers need to be overcome to make this happen? Over to you first, Chloe.
I don't know if I would use the word excited to describe this, but we are currently in an affordability crisis, as probably everyone on this webinar feels and knows. This is why I say I'm not particularly excited about it, because obviously I wish we weren't in an affordability crisis. But with an affordability crisis comes the opportunity to make changes that help people be able to survive, to live, to thrive where they work, where they live, while also making steps to improve the climate crisis. I won't lie, I'm not like an economic or energy policy expert by any means, but I know that if we, increase energy efficiency in our homes, then we don't have to pay as much with our heating bills or electricity bills. There's so many other common sense solutions that we can do to, make lives more affordable and easier for folks, but at the same time be building a safer and more livable future for all of us. I know I personally am, I'm in university, I'm friends with a bunch of broke college kids, which is funny, but also just a really harsh reality. I'm, friends with people who aren't sure if they will be able to move out of their parents' house in their 20s. They just can't figure out a way to make that happen. And the fact that there's a climate crisis in their future doesn't make it any better. So I think that this is a key opportunity for Toronto City Council to listen to people's needs, to be addressing the affordability crisis in a way that is also equitable, recognizing that people most affected by the affordability crisis are also the people most affected by the climate crisis, and take steps towards improving both of these ongoing crises.
Thanks very much, Chloe. And you raised such an important point about the interconnectedness that needs to be there in terms of how City Council takes up affordability and climate action. And, we've already heard from Mike around a number of areas where that can really manifest, including housing and transit and many more. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I'm going to go over to Andrea next with the same question. What key opportunities are you excited to see our City Council take up and champion? And what barriers might need to be overcome?
Okay, thank you. So, and I think as I listened to Mike early on, I think it's really important to also maybe just to remind ourselves that a small group, it's a slower pace, but when we are also in our workplace or our own community, taking on the struggle for justice, it takes a large group of people for us to really make gains in these struggles, and definitely I would also say it's the same when it comes to us fighting for climate justice. And again, when I do look back, and I would say excited again to see our own City Council involvement in this when it comes overall to transform TO. Again, the Toronto Climate Action Plan it also need funding and staff. That's very important, again, so that every part of the city government incorporates the goal of transform TO. And I would say it's also important that we talk with our councillors to find out who will champion this funding. We also need to talk to city councillors that does not have an austerity agenda. This cannot be I would call it a band-aid program. As we also mobilize to be heard, I am also excited that Labour officially has a seat at the table with joint implementation committee of city unions that include the trades. This is important, again, when we look at what need to get done with workers demonstrating that they are familiar to their workplace, and also the opportunity to work jointly with the managers and their own co-workers to implement and also to train them and to mobilize them to improve their own work environment. Also, I'm going to go back to as they're at the seats, on these seats at the table as well. They're also educating City Council on key concerns when weighing in on the pros and cons when working towards a successful environmental plan in their own workplace. We can't go further if we're not pushing, and we have to push on equity with an intersectional lens. And over as we do this job, we see for sure when it comes to equity and when it comes to anti-racism in this portfolio, that it's very important that it's also incorporated, because we can't leave anyone behind, and measure this as a successful gain out of on climate justice. And I'm just also excited about the council's ability to focus on good jobs and just transition as part of our own climate action. Therefore, Toronto City Council must also pressure other level of governments, because they can be and they are also the barrier. It's also critical that we also think about how we get climate champions in place on Toronto City Council. And I'm going to go back to things that need to get done. One, as Mike also mentioned again, around it's not the right time, where we are hearing a lot. And we have to start off small as to what need to get done, whether the naysayer of it's not the right time. We also have a duty within our own self to start with ourselves. Do we vote? Are we planning to vote? And we must vote, and we must encourage families, and we must encourage our own friends and coworkers to vote. Oftentimes, we kind of get our setback, because after election day, we realize that a lot of our own family members didn't even vote. And so important to this. Again, and always room for volunteers. Wherever that needed, we should roll up our sleeves, step in and organize. There's always people out there that ready to do so, but we are not reaching out to them. So we should make sure that we are tapping into that, and just make sure that we're stepping up on this election campaign. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea, for that call to action, and also for reminding us that the broader picture is that we can't achieve climate justice or any other form of justice in our city under an austerity agenda. And we've seen ongoing long-term chronic underinvestment in many of the things that matter. So it's really important for us to zoom out, even though we're talking specifically about climate tonight, which is obviously a huge existential issue for all of us. We must also take that other perspective as well and see the kind of action we're calling for in a broader approach to funding what matters in the city. So thank you for reminding us of that. I'm going to go over to you, Mike, around the same question, opportunities and barriers, but I would also ask you maybe to speak a little bit around the role of climate champions. So what, as someone who has been in that inside climate champion role, and when you're thinking about the opportunities and barriers in this coming term, please, share your reflections with us on that.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief, just because I've gotten a lot of time on the microphone here, and I'd frankly love to hear what Chloe and Andrea have to say about the other questions as well. Is like, we know what the pathway looks like. it's about to actually reduce our GHGs. It's primarily about buildings and about transportation. Where we live, housing, and where we work, and what we do, and how we get there and back, right? Like it's so a lot of this is as like overlapping, are interdependent in many different ways, as Chloe had suggested right from the outset. So like, I think the opportunity and what we need to keep our eye on, which I think T's been really good at least as they've reminded me every time I've had to critique and make motions, is about accountability, transparency, and collaboration. Accountability, because politicians will want to do as little as possible and take as much credit as possible. We need to know they're doing what they say they're going to do, how much money is going to it, and whether or not that's what they're meeting what's necessary. If you're going to declare a crisis, like, I want to know whether or not you're responding to it as if it's a crisis. Housing crisis, affordability crisis, climate crisis, overdose crisis, like the overlapping crises we're having. I want to know, are you doing everything that's in your damn power to do? And if not, then what's the barrier? And then collaboration. I have always been a firm believer that lasting solutions are ones that are bipartisan, however you want to call it, but that bring people along with it. And that's where you get youth and seniors, you get workers and Bay Street, you get politicians from every stripe. You get them all onto in support of a policy direction. And that's what makes sure that it outlasts the lifetime of a political regime, of a political administration. Think Transit City. It's a great plan. Administration changed, gone. Didn't have the public support. Similar with parts of our cycling network. You didn't build out that support before doing the project. Make sure people feel like they were part of the collaboration. So engaging our Indigenous partners, engaging groups that are not currently represented or feel like they're being engaged by the political process. It's critical in finding finding lasting solutions. Last thing we want to do is spend a lot of time and energy building another Green Energy Act. And I was part of that activist movement before I was in politics. And then the next administration to come in and throw it all off the table. You know what that did? It gave companies, businesses that were going to come and build solar panels in Ontario to install on Toronto rooftops, zero confidence in Ontario as a place where they want to do business. So if all of a sudden we put forward a policy that doesn't make it stable for people to come and build low carbon buildings, apartment buildings, people to come and build apartment buildings in general, unless we build the climate and broad support for the climate that has that brings the implementation of climate solutions here, we're not going to get the jobs, and we're frankly not going to get the cost, the lowering of costs that you get when you're doing stuff on such a massive scale that needs to be done to create housing and to address our climate pressures. So we need to build that broad-based support with your conservative uncle, with your socialist sister. We need to make sure they all say, well, yeah, that policy makes sense because it's produced this for us, or it's going to produce this for us. And they see themselves in that policy, despite the fact that they might not see themselves in each other at any point in time. It's incredibly hard work that takes a while. We needed to have done it 10 years ago. So the next best time to do it is right now.
Thanks so much, Mike. And you touch on such an important element. I mean, a lot of us are very focused on, demanding things of council, but we also need to make sure that those demands are durable. And that not only involves inside champions that are willing to build bridges, even with other members of council that don't necessarily think like them, but it also really comes back to public support and the public creating political will, which I think is very much in line with what Muhammad Ali was sharing with us earlier. It's all about the grassroots. So
just one quick example of how that
please
works
shoot.
is the industrial water surcharge agreement. T was doing great work on the outside, mobilizing people. Counselor by counselor started saying, yeah, that makes sense. No one's ever going to touch that thing again. And we want.
Thanks for highlighting that in the shout out, Mike. I'm now going to move to my second question. And I'm going to be starting, I'll ask everyone, but I'll be starting off with Andrea this time. So thinking about the people with whom you collaborate and those on whose behalf you work. So those could be young people, workers, residents. If you had to choose one concrete climate action that you would like to see Toronto City Council take this coming term, what would it be and why? And I will ask all the panelists to keep your answers a little bit short so we can go to audience questions next. Over to you, Andrea.
Sorry, I just realized I mute myself. Yes, so I'm going to go back to City Councilor engaging with other public sectors, like institutional, like the school, hospital, colleges, and universities, and just to share their own best practice and complete these successful pilot projects, such as the mass timber building at George Brown, George Brown College, or the massive geothermal heating at the University of Toronto. I'd say this is a great opportunity to continue learning for business. This is gains this is a gain. It's not a loss. And also, I would say they shouldn't waste time trying to take the shortcuts, as I mentioned before. And I will continue to share when I say that, because when we do engage and best practice, one of those which I continue to share around the shortcut, where example of the green choice, that hotel took on many years ago, and still continue to do that, and to fight really hard to mobilize other hotels that didn't have that, to say you need to get on board with this. And it wasn't, I mean, the intent is to say to customer that they were already ahead of a lot of organization out there, a lot of business out there, when they're looking at best practice for the environment. And instead, it wasn't, a lot of customer come in and actually participate in it, thinking that they were doing the right thing, and not realizing that this was a greedy choice of business, just continue to make money. In the end, we see a lot of workers that hurt their bodies. We see a lot of workers who didn't have a set schedule. They were paying oftentimes more money into daycare because they were late to pick up their children, and I would say wasn't even working, even though the business already got paid for that service. They were not, because they were able to convince the public that they were helping to care for the environment. So I think going back to some of these practices already in place, it's definitely important to do so.
Thanks, Andrea. And, we need to remind council that one of the commitments around this low carbon job strategy that's supposed to be developed is to keep in line with a decent work agenda. And as you mentioned in your earlier response, now Labor has a seat at the table in terms of influencing the shaping of the Transform TO plan. So that's certainly something as we're thinking about talking to candidates in the election to bring up as residents in different wards across the city. I'm going to go over back to you, Mike, next with the same question. I'll ask you to keep it tight. If there is one concrete climate action, you've named many in your opener, but if there's one that you would like to see City Council take up this coming term, what would it be and why?
MA, I want to hear from Chloe. So I'm going to take a pass.
I was going to close with Chloe, but if you're going to take a pass.
No, I'm going to take a pass. I want to put time into hearing from Chloe.
Fair enough. Over to you, Chloe. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks. I think for me, this is not something that just impacts young people. This is something for everybody in the city, but public transit is such a huge thing. I know that's like such a talking point, just like random conversation with anyone from Toronto, just talk about public transit and how we wish it was better. And it can be better. I think everyone on this webinar will know, increasing public transit, increasing its accessibility and its reliability will help get cars off the road, get more folks using the public transit and helping the environment, but also public transit is such an equity issue as well. Everything I'm about to say is stuff that TTC Riders, this awesome grassroots group, is saying much more eloquently and better. So I am definitely taking from them, but improving public transit and access to public transit, it really will help the people that rely on public transit the most. And those are folks who are lower income, who are Black, Indigenous, other people of color, folks with disabilities, unhoused folks. These are all people that rely on public transit that really need it. And improving its access is important because these are also the same people who are going to be impacted by the climate crisis the most. And maybe it seems like a pipe dream for me to be like, yeah, like free public transit for all. But we already see that stuff happening in other cities. We see cities who are providing free public transit for unhoused folks, for seniors, anyone who really, really needs it. So I don't think it's a far cry for me to say that we should be looking into that too for Toronto. The other thing I'll say, which is not as much of a concrete thing that we need, but something that I was, thinking about as I was listening to the speakers at this webinar, is we need a government, in the next term who's not going to greenwash us and who's going to actually make action happen. The reality is right now with me and my friends, my other students, the idea of our world crumbling and us not having a future is just a punchline to a joke for us. Like, it's just so accepted. We joke about it. We talk about it like it's going to happen. Like everyone's accepted it. And it's really sad that people are at that place now. Mike mentioned earlier how he's, worried thinking, will his kids ever be able to have kids of their own? I can say for me and my friends, that's not even a question. Most of my friends don't believe that they can have children ethically, given the future that we're heading towards. So that's what's at stake right now. And we can't have more governments, another, term of city council, be making promises, be making commitments, saying that, yeah, we for sure want to hit, this target, but then not actually taking the steps to do it. So I think I'll end at that.
Thanks so much, Chloe. And your transit example really illustrates how better things are possible. We see them elsewhere, but it's up to us to demand them. And, we have some tremendous youth organizers like you that are helping us and reminding us what is possible and what we should be calling for, particularly in this election and beyond. So thank you for that. Now we're going to have a quick poll, and I would also invite you, if you have any specific questions for the panelists, to please put them in the chat.
So the poll question is, when is Toronto supposed to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions under the adoption of the Transform TO strategy? net zero by 2040 or net zero by 2050? And the question has a couple of steps along the way, some background information. So we'll take just a few more seconds to see if anybody else wants to answer it. Oh, sorry, the poll disappeared. I don't know why. Let me see if I can launch it again. So I'll start from scratch there. All right, another couple of seconds. 3, 2, 1. We'll end the poll. And there's the results. And over to you, MA, if you want to explain the answer.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Susan, for being the voice of our poll and the administrator of our poll. And so maybe actually I'll get Mike maybe to make a very quick comment on this. So the correct answer is net zero by 2040. I mean, what does that mean, Mike? In a nutshell, like the fact that we've anchored net zero on 2040 as opposed to 2050.
So the original target was 80% by 2050, which came to us from the IPCC. IPCC scientists many years later said, yeah, y'all got to move a whole lot faster. And so they said 100% by 2050. But when city staff did the modeling, they essentially said, to actually make net zero by 2050, you have to do all the activities well in advance by that actually allows you to achieve 100% or near 100% by 2040. And so they came forward with that as the strategy because it just didn't make sense to wait the additional 10 years. Now, odds are, and it's not a punchline for another funny joke that Chloe and her friends may share, or a not so funny joke, I suppose. Odds are in the next couple of years, we're going to have scientists tell us, if you don't move faster, you're screwed. And so I think having the 2040 target probably makes a lot of sense. As long as we actually use it as a target and try to achieve it.
Thanks, Mike. I'm now going to ask a few questions that were put forward by our participants. Thank you very much. We are running a little bit low on time, so we may not get to all of them. I apologize in advance, but I will try to ask a few of them. So I will just turn to the notes that I have been provided with the questions here. And so here's a question. Toronto Public Health estimates that over 1,400 people in Toronto die prematurely due to air pollution. People who live near highways, transportation infrastructure, and major roads have much higher health risks. How do we incorporate these issues into our agenda? Anyone want to take a shot at answering that question? I think the question itself raises a very important point that perhaps people should be speaking to candidates about, but anyone want to respond to that?
I'm sorry, MA, I didn't hear the question. My kids are hollering about a bath in the background. So
the question's about premature deaths due to air pollution. People who live near highways, transportation infrastructure, and major roads have much higher health risks. How do we incorporate these issues into our agenda? Do you want to take that, Mike?
Well, I would say, like, it was years ago when the medical officer of health declared that that cosmetic pesticides should be banned because of the impact on public health. I sent a report request into the medical officer of health and about whether or not they have any tools to help us fight climate change, to reduce the number, to accelerate our plans to try to address it. They came back and said they didn't feel they had the power to do that because there wasn't an immediate connection. But we know that there is. Like, if folks have seen the data, but I think a lot of people living in those areas don't actually accept that that's that's true. We need to communicate with people, and we need them to feel empowered to take that information, the people living in those off those corridors, to bring it to their elected officials to say, we need to have just less cars. It's not about how fast the cars can move on roads. It's about getting to less cars. We get into constant debates, and we're going to have this on Yonge Street soon about whether or not we should keep the cycling and patio infrastructure on the active TO installation. And the argument will be, well, you reduced you increased our drive time by X number of minutes. Well, that's got to be bad for the environment. So, well, we should get rid of the bike lanes as a result. That missed the point entirely. Unfortunately, that is often the tone that councillors take, particularly those that have a lot of constituents living next to highways. I don't have any constituents living next to highways, so they're not voicing that opinion, although Avenue Road is perhaps could be considered one. But we need to educate and engage that community so that they feel empowered to bring that voice and that message to their elected officials.
Thanks very much, Mike, for answering that. And certainly, continuing to build that bridge between health, climate, transit, housing, and other issues will be critical in this coming term. Chloe, did you want to take a quick stab at that one?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Sorry. When I'm not doing climate stuff, I am a student studying public health at U of T, so I feel quite passionate about this. Obviously, this is not part of the municipal agenda, but I think the point that was raised about, the public health crisis and how the climate crisis plays into it shows why this increasing privatization of healthcare that we've been seeing from other levels of government is so detrimental, because if we want to safeguard our future, if we want to adequately prepare for the climate crisis, then we need to be preparing our health systems. But where it does connect to municipal politics and city council is something that we talk about a lot in public health is, of course, the social determinants of health, and the way that income is a big thing that decides whether or not you're going to have a good health outcome or not, whether you're going to feel healthy, live longer or not. And that's something that I think city council can play a big part in, making sure that folks that live in those areas that are more prone to being affected by the climate crisis have the health or have the income that they need to be able to, survive, and not just survive, but to thrive.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you for raising that link between climate preparedness and the health system. We haven't had a whole lot of time to talk about climate preparedness, so maybe that's another event for future, which we should certainly think about organizing. I'm going to go over to you, Andrea, next, and I'm going to reframe this question slightly to take a bit of a nonpartisan form, because some folks may be looking for candidate recommendations, which I won't ask about on this panel. But Andrea, when you're thinking about getting climate champions on to city council, like what are you looking for in candidates, without naming any names? What things, what qualities, what experiences, would you be looking for when you're considering the need to have climate champions on council, which you mentioned earlier?
Yeah. I would say someone who definitely ready to fully understand, are coming in with much knowledge of what's happening into the communities, what's really happening when it comes to the workplace, and ready to work, not necessarily just gathering the information, but ready to get out there and do the work, to mobilize, to get things done. That's very important. I think having a new counselor, or sometimes I always say counselor that come in with the passion and not sure when they fall asleep, what happened over time. But I would say eager to learn. Every place is not the same, but that eagerness to learn about what's in existence in the community and in the workplace, and eager to have these conversations with, I would say, consider people in the community that could be someone that vote for you next time, or actually voted for you in the first place. and they're ready to work with them to make changes where necessary.
Thank you so much for that answer. And, you know, that important aspect of being willing to engage with people, being open and willing to learn, because there is so much to learn on all of our parts, but especially for those that are going to represent us in the next city council. We are running a little bit short on time, and I realize that we haven't gotten to all the questions, and I do apologize for that. I think we need to perhaps have a part 2 to this event. I think we have one last participation poll that we might put up for all the folks on the call. But while we're doing that, I do want to take this moment to really thank all of our panelists, Mike, Andrea, and Chloe, for sharing your insights. We could keep speaking with you all evening, I think, and we really look forward to hearing more from you as we move into the council term with a new council to be determined what that looks like. So thank you so much on behalf of the organizers for tonight.
So this poll asks a question about the outcomes of Toronto's Better Building Partnership, which was set up by the building trades and progressive city councillors to retrofit office buildings and high-rise apartments. And it asks, which of the outcomes was that, what did the partnership achieve? 45,000 person years of employment, 680,000 tons of CO2 reductions, 375 million in cumulative energy cost savings. None of the above or all of the above? We'll leave a couple more seconds for anyone else who wants to answer.
Susan, can I add, it was rebranded by the mayor as the Mayor's Greenville Initiative and hasn't done much since.
Arr. Well, when it did, this is what people think was the outcome, and who wants to give the actual answer?
Want to give us the reveal, Susan?
All right, the answer is all of the above. Employment benefits, CO2 reductions, and cost savings from retrofitting high rises and office buildings. So a lot of good work can be done through building changes, you know, as we heard at the beginning from Cass.
So this is a great example of an initiative that can result in a lot of co-benefits, as we say, for community and for the environment, but it needs to get maybe a little bit more unstuck. And that is something that is a question for the next council as they take up their role. So I want to just highlight a call to action that has been put forward by the organizers of this event. And, you know, it's really, really important that at this stage, as many candidates as possible hear from our communities and that they hear the message around climate action in the different forms that it needs to take. So I'm just going to, I will read this and it's also on the screen. So here's a call to action and questions to ask candidates. Will you fully commit to supporting the climate emergency motion passed by Toronto City Council in October 2019? There is a lot of very firm commitments that were made, but they need follow through. Second question, will you fully support funding and staffing of Transform TO to ensure that we meet our climate goals for 2025 and 2030? That is a near-term goal, 2025, that is going to happen. And we need to make sure that Toronto's on track for that. And lastly, will you champion a green economy based on equity and inclusion for all our communities? And we've heard a lot of very insightful remarks around the importance of a green economy and good green jobs and opening those doors. There is enough work to go around many times, but those doors and clear pathways need to be there. So with that, I want to really thank everyone for being here at this event. We have a lot of collective work ahead of us. I do hope that in each of your own ways that you will be able to participate in the lead up to the election and really talk to candidates in your wards about this. I want to thank everyone. I know there are a lot of folks on this call who've done a lot of work already. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done and the work that you have yet to do, and feel that, you know, we can really set the stage for a different council term, building on the good work of many of the folks in the community and many champions on council that we have already had. So with that, I want to thank everyone again. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank the event organizers, and I want to thank you for participating and, you know, sending a strong message for demanding